And here's some good descriptors. It didn't have a lot of carbonation, similar to a port or a Madeira sherry. As mellow as an old Burgundy and as hearty as a beefsteak. That's a great descriptor. Allsops did 3 of these in the 1800s, 3 expeditions, and then after Allsops merged with Incoop in 1934, Incoop came out with the AAA barley wine, which was based loosely on this, but it wasn't the same beer. And how I found out about this was somebody put out a blog talking about a home brewer, Chris Bowen, out in Pennsylvania, who is very into historical beers, and he wanted to rebrew this beer, and he did a project where he went up to the Arctic Circle on motorcycles last summer and with 2 other guys, and they brewed this beer up north of the Arctic Circle and had a film crew with them and everything, and I think he's trying to make a movie or a TV show or something out of it, but really cool. And Chris has been great in sharing what he did, and I just think it's incredible. Here's some pictures of Allsops Arctic Ale. That's Steve Wellington, who's the head brewer at the Basque Museum Brewery, or Coors Museum Brewery. He's the one that's brewing Worthington's White Shield IPA, and this is a tasting that Chris Bowen went to, and this was an original bottle of the Arctic Ale, and then this is a bottle of a Basque barley wine that was over 100 years old. And they had a tasting there, and it's out on the web. You can look it up and get the tasting notes. I think Roger Protz wrote something about it. He was there as well. So this is the later version of the barley wine. But pretty cool stuff, I think. We all know the story of India Pale Ale, but there's a misconception out there that porters didn't make couldn't survive the trip to India. And actually, porter was a very popular beer in India. Most of the troops there survived on porter, and actually the government wanted porter to be shipped to India to keep the soldiers from drinking rum. And they thought this was a safer alternative. So the government porter, as it was called, or the East India porter, was basically a higher hop version of the regular porter, 4 to 6 pounds per barrel. That equates to 2.5 to 3 ounces per gallon. So those of you that homebrew a lot can make that equation. 1060 OG, 4 to 6% alcohol by volume, 6%. Here's an old recipe here. And this is a Dan Paquette Pretty Things Ale and Beer Project East India Porter that he got the recipe from Ron Pattinson and brewed this beer just recently. Yeah. American Stock Ale, similar to the British Stock Ale. Most of the American brewers in the 1800s definitely took their lead from the British. Here's an example of an American Stock Ale that I found. Americans were a little bit more liberal with their use of sugars in the 1800s because they didn't have the great malt supplies that the British brewers had. And so sugars, molasses, honey, things like that were very common in early American beers. Let's see how I'm doing on time here. Unhopped ales. I didn't really focus on this, but I thought I'd throw them in just, the Groots and things like that. Again, some of these got very extreme, very high alcohol, and so they'd be kind of fun to research and dig into. And then there were some other ones that I found, through searching and couldn't really find anything, as far as how these beers were brewed, but I thought I'd include them because there's some good stories. The Huff Cap. Also called Mad Dog or Dragon's Milk. Any strong beer had these names. And evidently Huff Cap was kind of a term, if you get belligerent, I guess you're huffing, and I guess, you put your cap down or something, and that's why I guess the beer induced some sort of belligerence. Groaning Ale, I thought this was kind of interesting. This was a high gravity ale made for women that were giving birth. So supposedly, assuming it deadens the pain a little bit, makes things a little bit easier to get through. You'll see a lot of references to hock, which is, it refers back to the harvest of the ingredients. I haven't been able to find a whole lot of this, but if you go to breweries in England, you'll see hock cellars and basically barrel aging cellars. Got some other spiced ales here, Hogan Mogan, I think that's how you say it. And then this one I want to do a little more research on. The Windsor Ale and the Welsh Ale are kind of, it appears to be somewhat hybrid styles, hopped and spiced at the same time, and fairly high in alcohol content. There's some literature out there that I saw that described the Welsh ale as being brewed with a lot of honey, so maybe it was more like a braggot than a beer, but not really sure yet. There's some different references to that beer. Okay, so those are the styles I've got that I wanted to talk about, and then I kind of wanted to finish up with some of the things that we found going through researching these beers, and if it generates some interest on your part, some things we found that have been very helpful and ways to find out about some of these beers. These are great websites here. If you're into historical beers at all and you're not reading either one of these two websites, you're missing out. Shut Up About Barclay Perkins by Ron Pattinson is awesome. He's going through brewing records all the time, and he's clarifying them and debunking myths and things like that. And he's very detailed, and then he puts recipes out periodically on his website. And it's a wonderful, I look at it every single morning when I get into work. That's one of the first websites I pull up. Ziphophile by Martin Cornell. Again, Martin is a guy who has gone through the research, and he's focused a lot on looking at old newspaper ads and advertisements and things like that from breweries, and kind of figuring out where beers fell into place with relationship to other styles. And again, he's done a lot of debunking and clarifying of some of these old brewing procedures, and he's got some books out as well. Google Books is great. A lot of the historical books that I'm going to list here are available on Google Books, and you just do a search on it. Search Huff Cap, and you'll find a few references. So Google search has been a great help to me. Here's some of the books that we've looked at. Again, a lot of these historical books are on Google Books. They may not have the whole text there, but they've got enough where you can get some really cool information. The Town and Country Brewery book, Where Every Man His Own Brewer, is a really good book. The Noted Breweries of Great Britain and Ireland by Alfred Bernard. That one's actually available. You can buy that one now. There's a CD-ROM of the book too, and it's a great book because what this guy does is he goes through every brewery in England and in Ireland and takes a tour through the brewery and writes out how the brewery was managed and how it was staffed and what the fermenters looked like and what the brew house looked like. It's got a lot of drawings, really cool drawings in it. The Theory and Practice of Brewing by Tizard in 1846 has some of the most complete brewing technical information that was available at the time. It's a great book. Same thing with the Scottish Ale Brewer and Practical Maltster. A lot of, this is at the time when they were just starting to get into analyticals, and so there's a lot of gravity information and things like that in this book, and there's nice charts and stuff. And then there's a couple of other ones here. One of the things I wanted to mention was AmSync, Practical Brewing. So this is a guy who was a brewer, and then he went out to other breweries and made detailed brewing logs of how they brewed their beers at these other breweries. And he's got a lot of recipes in this book. And I haven't been able to find a copy of the book, but Ray Daniels sent me a few pages from it, and I just thought it was tremendous. It's amazingly detailed. It's a brewing log like what you'd see today, and you can really make sense out of it. And then some more recent books, and definitely, as we got spurred on into diving into some of this stuff, these books all came into play. Randy Mosher's book, Radical Brewing, has some great stuff in it about historical beers. Highly recommend that book. Martin Cornell's The Story of the Pint and Amber Gold and Black are both great books about historical British brewing techniques. The Durden Park Beer Circle back in the 1970s, and Dr. John Harrison put out a book. They got access to a whole bunch of British archives, brewing archives, and put out a whole bunch of old recipes. They're not the most detailed recipes in the world. They pretty much give malt percentages and hopping on an ounce per gallon rate. They don't tell you much about the mashing techniques or anything like that, but you get the specs of the beers, and you can, if you're an accomplished brewer, you can figure out the rest. And then some of these other books are just basically books about the brewing industry in England, and they tell you how to go through and read the recipes, like the Guide to Historical Records. Ron Pattinson has published a couple of books that are available on his website, and he's got a great book on porter out there. I highly recommend that if you're interested in historical porters and East India porters and that kind of thing. And then Steve and I went to England and we got to visit some archives. And the Coors Visitor Center, the Bass Museum, just opened up about a year ago, reopened up. The Coors had closed it and then they just opened it back up. And we got to go in there. The Scottish Brewing Archive in Glasgow has all of Younger's brewing records. We went to the National Brewing Library in Oxford, at Oxford Brookes University. They have Michael Jackson's archives. It's just about 20 file cabinets and files in there, and you can go through all those if you get permission to go in there. And they have a bunch of these old books as well. And then there's a few other ones. A lot of the people that are doing research today go through the British Library and the London Metropolitan Archives and go through and look at newspapers and advertisements in these, and you can get a lot of information from that. And a lot of challenges to brewing, researching old brewing recipes. A lot of the archives are gone. Of course, in the United States, that's a huge issue. Prohibition caused, really caused the loss of a whole lot of archives, brewing archives. There are language barriers as well. You'd think, 200 years ago, people talked the same way, but they didn't, and they didn't write the same way. And brewing terminology was different as well. And I'm going to show you some recipes here, and if anybody can decipher them, I'm happy to buy you a beer. And then differences in knowledge levels. The brewers talk about yeast, but they don't really know what it is. And you need to understand the process, and sometimes they use codes in these books, little symbols and things like that. So all that stuff makes it really tough to take open a brewer's logbook from 1820 and read the recipe and figure out what it means. It's really quite difficult, and I admire the people that have been able to do it, because I haven't been able to yet. I got some pictures here. You like this? It kind of reminds me of Young Frankenstein for some reason. But I just this came from Steve and I went to the Bass Museum or the Coors Museum the day that they reopened up the archives, and Ray Anderson from the Historical Society got us in there, and they were all frenzied and everything. But we did get some time, and they allowed us to take pictures, which not all archives will let you do. But I just thought this was kind of amusing. These are some of the old books out there, and of course they want to make sure everybody knows that they're old. So there's the London and Country Brewer, which is a really good book, and I think that one's available on Google Books, at least in part, where you can go in and look at it. Okay, here's some of the codes that I'm talking about, some of these symbols. I don't know what this means. You can read the dates, but the handwriting here, it's very difficult to read. Okay, and a lot of these brewers' books, you open them up and the handwriting is very exquisite and it's very neat, but it's also very flowing and very hard to read. This I got from Ron Pattinson's site, and it's a brewing logbook. Here's the malt, and you can see the malts listed in quarters, not in pounds. So you got to do some calculations there. Pounds of hops. Let's see. This is the fermentation record. So you've got the temperature in degrees Fahrenheit, and then you've got the gravity here. I don't know if the gravity is in Balling, Plato, specific gravity. Who knows? You just have to know. Interesting what they're adding to the kettle: Irish moss, Spanish juice. So, I don't know what that is. Actually, I looked that up. I forgot what it is, but there is a definition for Spanish juice. I had forgotten what it is. So here's a brewing log here, and you can see it's not a very good picture, but I just wanted to show it because of the writing. You can see how neat it is, but the writing is extremely hard to read and decipher. And of course, the terminology they use is different than what we use today, so that makes it even more difficult.